Not going to give a grade or anything like that, but I will say some interesting picks. Okay, some things that you're wondering. Okay, what did they see with this guy? I think that Barron is a home run. That's a solid pick. Top end, you're happy about with what the Broncos did, and the rest, let's see some question marks that are just saying to be determined. Hello, and thank you for joining us here on Broncos and Bourbon as we wrap up the 2025 NFL Draft. I am Phil Milani, taking a look at the Broncos draft this year, and we'll get into all of the day 3 picks here, but I just wanted to start out by taking a look at the draft class overall. I do think that the Broncos, they got better this weekend, okay? George Paton, Sean Payton, of course, they're going to say, we got our guys, we feel good about the draft, but I think overall, it's clear what the Broncos did. They addressed a couple of needs with running back, wide receiver. They took the best player available in round 1, which is always a good idea. And then I also think they made a couple of decisions here that we're going to have to just give it some time to see how this thing plays out, because they made, especially the Pat Bryant pick at the end of day 2, a little bit of question there, and then a couple of questions that we'll get into here from day 3. Not going to be critical of those picks, just going to say, let's just see how things play out, because they did raise some questions, I guess, as we sit here as the draft just wrapped up. So we're going to have to see how things played out. There's some guys that the Broncos took that have played a lot of college football and appear ready to make an impact as rookies. And then they took some guys that are going to be a little bit developmental, and maybe the Broncos like their high upside, but right now clearly not ready to play at the NFL level. So let's get into what they did here on day 3. In the 4th round with the 32nd pick, they took Q Robinson, an edge defender out of Alabama, 6'4", 243 pounds. Now you look at that size, that kind of tells you maybe he's a tweener. That's what I would describe that size at. Maybe not quite big enough right now to play on the edge along the line. But here's something interesting. When you look at a player coming out of college here, you don't necessarily just look at what his weight is right now. What you like to evaluate is their frame. Okay? Does this person have a frame that you can add some weight onto it here? And with Q Robinson, if they want him to play as an edge up along the defensive line, he's going to have to put on some pounds, because he'll just get thrown around at this weight. But the other thing about him is that he has not started a lot, has not played a lot on the defensive side. He's played a lot of special teams. You heard George Paton mention that after the draft, that they liked what Robinson did on special teams. Maybe that's how he'll get a jersey on game day here for the Broncos as a rookie, is a standout special teams player, which is important, okay? I'm not trying to knock that, but he only started 5 games on defense for Alabama, okay? It's hard to crack that Alabama defense as a starter, but it does sort of, they're projecting here with Robinson, okay? He's only started 5 games. He's raw. He's athletic. I think that they liked his athleticism, and that's what a lot of the draft gurus here, they're saying that he's athletic, but obviously just starting the 5 games, he's raw. Okay, 23 tackles, 7 tackles for a loss, 4 sacks last year. A season that ended with an elbow injury. So we'll have to see what they're able to do with him. But if they believe that he's got the frame, that they'll get him in the weight room, they'll get him working with their nutrition staff, they'll get him working with the weight room, get Bo Lowry with him here, and maybe they feel like his frame, they can add some weight onto this guy. And this when you're the Broncos and you're sitting here on day 3 and you feel like your roster is sort of ascending and getting better, it's okay once in a while to take a swing on a guy that right now maybe not ready to play on defense here for you in the NFL, but you take a swing and say, look, if this guy can develop his game, maybe we'll hit a home run here in a year or two. And that's what the Broncos have got to be thinking here. Sean Payton did mention that there's a few Alabama ties with the coaching staff. So obviously some familiarity with Q Robinson. They highlighted his motor. They like that he's just constantly going. So those are traits that you're looking for, okay? If you can find a guy who's got the right mentality, he plays football the right way, he's got a high motor, he plays all the way through the whistle. If you find a guy like that who loves football, who's passionate about it, and you feel like you can work with his body frame, then you're talking about a player that you would draft in the 4th round here. So that's what the Broncos did with their first pick here on day 3. Then nothing in the 5th. In the 6th, this was sort of a surprise. They drafted a punter. Okay, Riley Dixon is gone, so the Broncos needing to address the punting position. This is a little bit surprising, though. Jeremy Crawshaw was the only punter taken in the draft, but maybe you're finding a guy who's your punter long term here, and if that's the case, hey, who cares? It's a 6th-round pick, and if you found a guy who's going to play a significant position for you long term, then it's worth the pick, okay? But it was a little surprising because you could see that there's maybe some other areas that the Broncos could continue to address and build depth here, but they went with a decision here to take the punter. He's Australian. Last year, 45.8 yards per punt. That was tied for 7th in the country. 25 punts inside the 20 for him coming out of Florida there. They used the 40th pick in the 6th round here for the punter. George Payton, after the draft, said that they felt like this was the best punter in the draft. So if you're taking the number 1 guy at a position of need, then you could sort of understand and justify why the Broncos made this selection. But you do have to wonder, and maybe they had some intel here that they knew that a guy like Crawshaw wasn't going to be available after the draft as a college free agent. So, hey, they need a punter. They go ahead and pull the trigger on Crawshaw here. And we'll have to see how that turns out. I mean, if you have like the best punter and he's flipping the field for you, that's a valuable player to have here. You just wonder, okay, was there anybody else who's still on the board that maybe you could have snagged, and then later on you went and tried to find your punter here. So we'll have to see how this plays out for the Broncos. But if you get a guy and he plays long-term for you, it's fine, okay? If you hit here, and I think that's the big thing, you got to hit if you're taking a punter here. It's kind of like your fantasy football draft, right? You're building your depth here all the way through. You're still taking running backs and wide receivers later, and then at the very end, you're like, oh yeah, by the way, I need a kicker, right? Or oh yeah, I need to draft the defense. That's kind of how you're like, okay, they took the punter. Let's see how this thing plays out. But that was one that kind of raised a little bit of a question. And if that raised a question, their final pick definitely raised some question marks here. The Broncos in the 7th round drafting Caleb Lohner, a basketball player out of Utah. Okay, he played basketball for BYU, Baylor, and Utah in his college career. Played just 1 season of football. Okay, so you're talking about the tight end position here. There's a long history of basketball players playing tight end in the NFL. Antonio Gates, he played both, okay, but he played basketball at a high level for Cal. Antonio Gates played basketball. Did I just say Antonio Gates twice? Sorry, I'm thinking of oh my gosh, who's the tight end from Cal who played? Who's the Hall of Famer? Best tight end, Cal, played for the Chiefs, played for the Falcons. Hold on, I'm looking it up. I'm just blanking on his name, and you feel sort of stupid here. Hold on. Oh my gosh. Tony Gonzalez. Oh my gosh. That was embarrassing. Sorry about that. Tony Gonzalez played basketball for Cal and was obviously a Hall of Fame tight end. Antonio Gates played basketball. with Sean Payton particularly. Jimmy Graham played basketball and obviously had a tremendous career in the NFL. So there is a translation from the skills that you play basketball to playing football. Sean Payton said he mentioned he saw Lohner play at his pro day, saw him on the field moving in football gear, and they felt comfortable enough to take him. Look, he's 6'7", 250 pounds. So you think, okay, if you work with this guy, maybe you could develop him and you can get him to a point where he's a red zone target, something like that. But a really an interesting pick. I'll just say that. You don't see too many 6'7" guys. When you get too tall, you just have a little bit of a problem there where it's your body control and the movements that you have to make as a football player become a little bit more difficult. The quick, crisp movements that you have to make. When you're 6'7", it can become a little bit difficult, in my opinion. So we'll have to see how this materializes. Again, look, you're in the 7th round here. You take a swing, and maybe this guy can develop and become a weapon for you down the road. And obviously, they must have had some intel that Lohner wasn't going to be available as a college free agent, or that market was going to be really competitive. So you say, hey, let's go ahead and take a guy here in the 7th round with the 25th pick in the 7th round. So big question mark with him. We'll see how that comes along, but just some sort of picks here on the third day that are going to be major developmental type of guys where you thought maybe they could have brought in, maybe added like another running back. That's what I would have thought maybe they would have done. Maybe you had somebody along the defensive line, continue to build that depth there. That's what I thought maybe that you would do. But look, the Broncos roster overall is in such a good spot. And when you're getting better and better and better, it's going to be harder and harder and harder to make this team. And I'm not saying the Broncos are there just yet, but they're heading in that direction. So you're making some selections here that you're saying, let's take a chance on a guy that has high ceiling, big potential, but maybe isn't quite there just yet. And just sort of see what happens, okay? I think that's obviously what the Broncos were doing here on day 3. But again, overall, looking at this draft, Jahdae Barron, almost everybody gave that pick an A. The second cornerback taken after Travis Hunter, best player available. This guy should be able to just walk onto the field and play instantly for the Broncos. I think you got to feel really good about that first-round pick. I think that you just feel strong about that. R.J. Harvey, the running back out of UCF, quick twitch guy, excellent vision, says Sean Payton. I think that you feel pretty good and you trust Sean Payton drafting a running back there. Time will tell to see how some of these other running backs play out, but the Broncos go with Harvey. You're sort of saying, okay, let's see. Pat Bryant, this is another question mark. It felt like maybe there's some other wide receivers that were available, but the Broncos high on Bryant here. So we'll have to see his sure hands, which I think that just the one drop last year. Maybe this is something that they're like, hey, we really need a guy who's going to be dependable. But Bryant is another guy who's going to have to go out there and prove himself and show that he belongs here and show why the Broncos used that 74th pick on him on day 2. Then they moved up Savion Jones, an edge guy out of LSU, started 13 games each of the last 2 seasons. They needed to add some depth there at the edge position. They go with Jones out of LSU, 4.5 sacks last season. And then just went over the guys today, but we'll have to see how this plays out. I think, maybe you found somebody hidden here. Maybe Crawshaw becomes your long-term punter. Maybe they hit on one of these guys that's sort of a project right now, and you just sort of see where you go from there. I think that this is going to be a draft that for the Broncos that we'll know. Other than Barron, I think we're going to have to just wait and sort of see what happens here. Wait until these guys hit the practice field, see what they can do in training camp. Maybe they burst a little here and there. Let's see what happens in preseason. If some of these guys show some flashes that you say, okay, there's something here that we can work with. It does feel like maybe some of these guys are going to be practice squad contenders here. It feels like, certainly Lohner, and we'll see what if Robinson's able to play enough on special teams to earn a roster spot here. But, I think that overall we're just going to have to wait and sort of see what happens with some of these later picks here. But I think you feel good about Barron, and you sort of feel good about what Harvey's going to bring. And the rest of these guys, we're going to have to sort of see how things play out. Of course, this process is not over. The Broncos working the phones for college free agents, trying to continue to bring in talent. And the Broncos have such a rich history of finding talent in the college free agent market there. So don't count these guys out. Just because they didn't hear their name called in the draft doesn't mean that they don't belong in the NFL. Doesn't mean that they can't find the right fit for them, the right situation, and really showcase what they're able to do. So one of the biggest pieces of draft advice that I've ever heard is that the draft is not the end of a process. It can kind of feel like that for a college player, that like, I worked my whole life to just get to this point. I had this whole college career and now it's paid off with this. That's the wrong way to look at it. This is just the beginning of what you're going to be able to show as a football player here. And you really have to think about it that way. The work starts now. And that's how you have to look at this, is say, I've been given a tremendous opportunity to play in the NFL. Now I have to go out and show what I can do. And so those guys who are free agents, those guys who felt like they should have gone a lot earlier in the draft, they come into the league with chips on their shoulder, eager to prove themselves. And a lot of times that, as Sean Payton mentioned with Shedeur Sanders, that can be sort of a dangerous thing. And so don't count out some of these guys just because they were a day 3 pick or college free agent. Let's see what happens here as they get on the field. Okay, once they start playing, it doesn't matter where you were drafted. Now you're just all football players, and you're going to be judged and evaluated out there on the field. So let the tape speak for itself and prove that you belong. That's what's going to matter here for these guys. So not going to give a grade or anything like that, but I will say some interesting picks. Okay, some things that you're wondering, okay, what do they see with this guy? I think that Barron is a home run. That's a solid pick. The cornerback out of Texas. You got to feel good about that. Harvey, a guy that you feel good about, but you're going to always compare him to some of the other running backs that the Broncos passed on. Bryant, we'll have to see. Okay, maybe this guy is going to prove everybody wrong, and he's going to say, look, I got sure hands. Maybe I didn't have the greatest combine, but I'm fast, and I can play in the NFL. I got good football speed, and that's all that matters, right? It doesn't matter if you can run fast in a straight line. It matters if you can run fast when you got the ball in your hand or when you're running a route and you got the pads on and a helmet, okay? And then the rest of these guys, we'll see what happens. Savion Jones, Q Robinson, a couple of edge guys. The Broncos looking to build depth there. Crawshaw, the punter. I think that they'll say that there's a punting competition, but really, you're drafting a guy here. He's got to be your punter. So I think that's the plan there. And then Lohner, hey, we'll see what happens long run there. But maybe the guy comes in and shows that, hey, look, as a tight end, I can run, I can box people out, I know how to get wide, and I know how to get the ball. So just give me a chance and I'll come down with it. Maybe that's the kind of player that he becomes. So I think that the top end you're happy about with what the Broncos did, and the rest, let's see some question marks that are just saying to be determined, okay? And don't be down on some of these picks, but let's just say, let's give these guys a chance and see what happens. So that's sort of where I'm thinking, and I hope that you've enjoyed the last couple of days here, these draft recaps, and it's been fun diving in and reading about these guys and learning more about these players that are coming in, and they're going to play for the Broncos. And and it's an exciting time. It's always a fun weekend, as you know, that the Broncos are turning over the roster. They're adding new guys. They're getting better, and for these guys, a dream come true. But the work starts now. So if you like these, subscribe, leave a comment. If you want to leave a grade, please do that. Let me know what you think about this draft, good or bad. I want to hear it all. So please let me know. And we'll be back again soon. And we'll get back to more of our traditional format where we have a guest, interview him, and then we'll do a little bourbon review at the end of that. So I hope you've enjoyed these. I'm Phil Milani for Broncos and Bourbon.